Hello, everybody. Happy Monday. Welcome to Roundtable. Coming to you live from Beijing. I'm He Yang, joined by Huang Shen and Patrick Flannery. Good as always to have you for this ride. We have some fascinating topics for discussion today and every day on today's program. July is being called a pivotal month for American renters who struggle to make rent. Eviction moratoriums are coming to an end, and so is a lot of assistance for renters and homeowners in the U.S. Could America be looking at a wave of evictions? We'll get into it. Also on the menu, we are on a mission of starting your week with a motivational kick. Don't miss out on our most inspirational segment, Motivational Monday. You can find us on Apple Podcast at Roundtable China. Subscribe, rate, and review us. It will help other folks to find the show. But first, on today's Roundtable. We are nearing the end of the month. And for millions of Americans, things are looking a little bit grim. Unemployment is high and pandemic eviction moratoriums have expired in states across the country. According to the Urban Institute's analysis of Census Bureau data, around 20% of renters did not pay their full rent in June, which has experts warning of a tsunami of evictions. So is this likely to happen, Patrick?
Well, the tsunami word, or cliff, or avalanche are the other words that the economists have been using. One told CNBC just over the weekend that all of those words would be an understatement as to what would happen if the COVID relief package is not passed at the end of this week. They're sleeping right now in Washington, D.C., literally. They're always figuratively kind of sleeping in Congress, but right now, our Monday, when they wake up, they've got something ahead of them that's a Herculean task, or it's actually pretty easy because this is preventable stuff we're talking about, and that is coming back to the table, extending, or not, the COVID CARES Act, as it's called, where people get whether it's $600 check, $1,200 stimulus check, an extension of the program that went into effect 4 months ago. As a component of that, you've got a rental crisis with evictions being threatened for millions of Americans. There had been a moratorium or a ban on landlords evicting their tenants right now because of COVID-19. And many had feared for the last couple of weeks that Congress was not going to meet this deadline to extend that moratorium. It appears that they will. Larry Kudlow, Donald Trump's economist over the weekend had said, we've got another $1,200 check coming. We're going to extend this moratorium on evictions, and we're going to get it done. So the Democrats and Republicans, once again, have got to come to the table and make sure this happens. It has lapsed, but in the meantime, this is supposed to happen before Friday. Remember, we're now officially inside 100 days of the re-election. Donald Trump knows that this has to continue. Otherwise, you have got something on your hands that we really haven't seen, and that is, forget just mass unemployment. You've got a situation where millions of people are now overrunning homeless shelters, overcrowding them in the midst of a pandemic. Home is the safe place to be, and people are threatened with having to leave it. That's where we're at in America.
And we have been seeing that there is this extra $600 a week in federal unemployment benefits, and that's, expiring.
Yes.
And that's definitely making a huge impact on those who are depending on these checks to buy food, to have a place to stay. And I think for those who are not particularly familiar with the situation in the U.S., might be a little bit baffled by literally people are living paycheck by paycheck.
Yes.
And during COVID, it seems like that's assistance that comes from the government. And without it, it is a serious issue of people don't have a place to live. Is it that bad on a wide scale?
Well, this stimulus package that started, I believe it was in March, the CARES Act, the coronavirus relief stimulus, it kept 16 million Americans out of poverty. That's the estimate by CNBC and some others who have been following this closely. If the moratorium on the evictions expires, and it technically has, but if it stays that way, and it's not supposed to according to the White House, you'd have 40 million people, 40 million people evicted from their homes. Now, before the pandemic, only 3.5 to 4 million people were evicted annually.
Say that number again, please.
Yeah, only 3.5 to 4 million people each year were evicted every year.
Wow.
Prior to the pandemic. If the evictions were to resume as we know it because of COVID-19, an economist told NPR that it would be in the area of 40 million who would be evicted from their homes over the coming months. But as we know, and I know this is a bit confusing, it's hard for me to understand. I'm an American, I follow this stuff. Thankfully, my families are not affected and so many aren't,
Yes.
but so many are. And this problem has persisted for generations. Now, the pandemic has forced it to the fore, and this White House, this Congress, has to do the right thing, and you
Right.
got to extend this.
Well, Huangshan, you coming from the Chinese perspective, what was your reaction when you saw this piece of news initially?
Firstly, I could understand why these eviction relief is so important, because I think the key point here is that the government, they're trying to suppress the economic activities nowadays to prevent the transmission of the virus. So as a result, many people, they may they are under the situation of they don't have the job to do, they don't get their paycheck, they don't have their money to support their living. But at the same time, I'm also curious about why people cannot pay their rents, because in Chinese people's perspective, even I'm the younger generation, but usually I've been taught that you need to think from the long term, and usually no matter how old are you, you still have a little bit of savings in order something happen. Then I don't know about how often I need to pay the rents, because in China either you pay it each quarter, or you just pay it every month, or you just paid it in a year as a whole payment. So I don't know which stage are they in. And also earlier we talked about in China, if you really don't have any money to support yourself, you can turn to your parents. At least they can lend you some money to survive for several months. But maybe it's also a different value, family value, because I think in the States, people, after they turn to 18, they have to stand on their own feet and they have to support themselves. Maybe it's not like the Chinese families, the parents, since I'm the only child in the family, my parents will support me whenever they can. And but at the same time, if we see this is a CARE Act, right? I'm wondering, like, how about the landlords? Because I think they're also in a very awkward position, because maybe that's their income source. So if we say we protect these tenants and we can get them out of the house and they can still live in the house they're renting and without paying any rent. So what about the landlords? Because this is their properties, and also at the same time, maybe they haven't got a full payment for the property yet. They are also under the pressure of pay off the mortgage. So if they can't get the rents from the tenant and they can pay off the mortgage, and they are in a financial crisis as well. So if there any CARE Act plan carried out by the government trying to protect the interests of this group of people, that's what I'm curious about.
I think that's the whole crux of the reason we need to pass another round of this stimulus package, for that reason, because that way landlords will get paid eventually. And landlords have been asked by economists, in the media, to get creative. Understand right now what is going on. Everybody's affected. Okay, you evict somebody. Now you have an empty apartment. You keep the family in there. There can be a system set up where the rent is paid in part for a while. This is something that just needs to be hashed out at a higher level than certainly I'm able to speak to. But the thing with mass unemployment, 1 in 4 families in America right now spends about 70% of their income on their rent, which is more than twice what anybody should be spending. The magic number is like 28% or 30%. That's the weird little financial figure. But when you're spending 70%, there is no savings. And if you don't have the luxury of family or relatives to fall back on, you do have government benefits to fall back on, but they are limited. And it's only becoming more well known because of everybody sort of receiving this COVID benefit right now. It's not a lot. It's something. A $1,200 check doesn't stretch very far, but it's something. And when you've got something like 50 million people filing for unemployment right now, it's a calamity, and something's got to change. The landlords, yeah, I mean, this is a business where typically they flourish, and right now, I guess if I'm a landlord, I'm looking at my conscience a little more than my wallet, and I think you have to. Easy for me to say, but I think you have to. People suffer all over the world, and this isn't a thing where we're talking about, well, people are lazy. They need to pull themselves up by the bootstraps. This ain't the year to argue that point. Everybody is in this together right now. And, because we don't have, socialized health care, because we don't have a safety net for everybody without Congress having to pass it every few months painstakingly, this is the situation we do find ourselves in America.
And also, I'd just like to know a little bit more about this so-called eviction process. Like, how does it work? Is it as brutal as we envision in our minds, that it's you can't make rent, you talk to your landlord, and let's say there's no agreement, and then you're thrown out of the house into the streets, and what comes after that?
That's the long and short of it. Yeah, you can work something out with your landlord. See, contracts, it's funny. Contracts seem to go both ways. When it's on the tenant to hold up their end of the agreement, they have to do it. Same in job scenarios. When it's on the boss or the landlord, suddenly they can tear it up. Well, if you sign a 12-month lease, and you do pay month to month traditionally in the United States, but you sign a 12-month. Like, I'm going to pay 12 months rent, but it's due on the first of each month. Okay, let's say, well, I did January to February. March comes. Hey, landlord, I got fired. I don't have any income. They're going to say, hey, as per your contract, you have another 30 days to pay, and by then you also owe that month. So you're already falling behind. If you can find a landlord who can fill out an addendum and help you out, great for you. And I'm not trying to paint all landlords as the same, but yeah, you're right. They're running a business. And without that, your possessions and yourself will find themselves outside that unit if something is not worked out. Usually, there's something, maybe it's 30 or 60 day required by law. You can't just knock on the door and then toss them out. But this happens all over the country.
And also, this is something that I would imagine can happen around the world, because there are times when things don't go according to plan, and you can't basically, get the funds together to pay for rent for next month. And what would the standard procedure be like here in China? Let's say, I'm not making next month's rent. That's just not something I can pay now.
I think it varies from whether your landlord is a nice person or not, or even the tenant is a decent tenant or not. It just still based on each individual stories. But I remember back in February and March when the coronavirus was really bad in China and it was widely spread all over the country. I remember that time, especially in Hubei province, and the government carry out some regulations, say people, they can apply and to delay or postpone the payoff of the credit card and also the mortgage if they don't have any job at the moment, or because at that time Wuhan was under fully lockdown, so they couldn't do any work at that time, so they can apply, and it's possible for them and to just delay the process of pay back their credit card or mortgage. And also, I think after that, and the government also trying to give some preferential policies for the areas has been hit really hard, and they say you should offer some rent deduction and or just enable your tenant to extend their contract. For example, give them like a 1 or 2 month breeze, and they can find a new places to live in. But at the same time, I think this is a regulation. I don't know how well it has been executed and in the practical level, but at the same time, it still depends on the relationship between the tenant and the landlord, because at that time the landlords, they are also in a very hard situations. Some of them, they're really nice. They are very considerate, and they think this is part of the social responsibility. They need to give some space for the people who are in their hardest time. So they think, oh, I can give you a 1 or 2 month free renting, or I can deduct maybe 40% or 50% of the rent. But also at the same time, some really, not bloody, but like some really practical landlords, they even raise the rent because they have lost a lot of money during the coronavirus. So it still depends. But in the common practice, I would say if it's not under the coronavirus, then you want to end the contract. You really, you need to, no matter you are the tenant or you're the landlord, it's very polite of you, like if you can notice each side maybe 2 or 3 months in advance. But if you are just under all the rules of the contract, but you just want to end the contract after a year, and then you decide whether to continue to rent this house or you want to change a house, that it's better for you to notice the landlord, or the landlord, you want to terminate the contract, you need to notice your tenant 1 month in advance. That's the practical that's a practice in general, but under coronavirus, people prefer to discuss the situations based on individual stories because there's no unified standard to apply here. It's so hard.
Yeah, and I just feel like contracts, especially rental, whether we're talking about China, U.S., I don't care. Right now, call it force majeure, Yeah, so many people get laid off. Well, okay, what about those work contracts? Well, the same goes for the landlords, and they need to take a step back and say, look, we can keep the tenants in there for a little longer. We need to write off 2020 as a just colossally bad year for everybody. This isn't about the bottom line this year. This should be the only thing Congress takes upon itself this week and for the next, few months to see this through, because this is preventable. Economists are saying this left and right. There is no reason that we've been able to bail out every other industry, the banks, the automotive industry. We need to take care of our own, and it's got to happen now. This is not due to laziness or liberalism. This is a crisis right now. And without help from the government, this is going to turn into a much bigger problem that the next president, be it Donald Trump or Joe Biden, is going to be unable and unfit to handle.
This is definitely the hot potato that's in their hands right now in Congress. And certainly when we talk about the policies derived from combating the coronavirus, it's not only a public health issue, but also it is the economy we're talking about. Because without putting this virus to rest, or at least keep the numbers low, down consistently, it's just too early to talk about economic growth or performance, that kind of thing. As I think in the U.S. with the reopening, and some people say maybe too hastily in a few states such as Texas or Florida, with reopening happening too early, then you suffer from a setback, and then the economy will suffer again, and people's morale suffers from it too, because we're talking about people all need to ideally cooperate and be supportive of each other, because staying at home actually and doing nothing actually helps in this rare case, but it's essential. And keeping the numbers down, what in the U.S. media called flatten the curve, that is what we all need to do, I think, around the world. And that's the priority before talking about economic performance and all that. But yes, we are looking at, this is essential for the daily lives of people, having a place to live and not be in the fear of being thrown out of their apartment. And there's one thing, as we were doing the research, I found to be rather interesting and possibly might be something unique to the American system. That is, if a person gets evicted, so asked to leave your apartment because you haven't paid rent, that could be something that leaves a mark on your record and makes it difficult for you to rent next time. And what do people do as a result of that? Well, usually they go to the not so popular areas to rent next time, because that's where the landlord would take you. And then sometimes it doesn't work. And then sometimes poverty ensues as a result. So, could
Yeah.
you tell us more about
Well, I think it's
that.
going to be it's going to be hard for anybody to come out of this thing with a good reference letter from their landlord, just across the board. I mean, people falling behind on their rent or breaching their contract. I think it's going to be kind of like one of those things where 2 years from now, when your next employer says, well, why do you have a gap for 2020? I just don't see that question being asked. It's almost like we're going to write this off. Now, whether that'll happen or not, we don't know. But there needs to be sort of a widespread understanding internationally that, if a landlord dare write some sort of a bad reference letter on your behalf because of COVID-19 and you fail to pay your rent, that landlord is in the wrong business. And I just don't think it's going to be an issue. I think it's going to be swept into the, my God, 2020 was really bad kind of narrative. And at that point, landlords are going to be hungry for new tenants anyway. So I don't see this particular year, this particular circumstance, the pandemic, keeping people